Recently, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense reported an explosion in the northern Crimean city of Dzhankoy, resulting in the destruction of Russian-caliber cruise missiles during transportation. However, Russia denies this claim, stating that there were no military targets near the explosion site. Ukraine claims that the destroyed caliber missiles were intended for attacks on Ukrainian territory. Dzhankoy is a key transport hub in the Crimean region and an essential supply point for Russian forces in southern Ukraine. Russian reports claim that Dzhankoy was attacked by a drone and intercepted by an air defense system, causing damage to 2 buildings and injuring 1 person. Due to a lack of evidence, it is currently unclear whether the caliber missiles were indeed destroyed. The U.S. Defense News website states that there is no evidence of large-scale Russian caliber missile losses, and it is unclear what type of drone the Ukrainian forces used. Ukrainian forces have long sought to attack Russian military bases and key infrastructure in Crimea. If it was indeed a Ukrainian drone attack on a train transporting Russian military weapons, it indicates that Ukrainian forces have extensive intelligence sources in Crimea. This may prompt Russian forces to adopt similar tactics, using drone attacks against Ukrainian transportation in the rear. It remains unclear whether the caliber missiles were destroyed, but if they were, it would put additional pressure on Russian forces. The attack on Dzhankoy may suggest that the Ukrainian forces are preparing to liberate Crimea. In addition, the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Putin on charges of war crimes and the illegal transportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. NATO countries have not engaged in talks with Putin, indicating that the battle for Crimea may still occur. The end of the war depends on internal changes in Russia, such as changes in leadership. Russia is unwilling to give up Crimea, and Ukraine is determined to fight vigorously in the region. NATO countries continue to support Ukraine, providing weapons assistance to help them achieve their goals. There are divisions within the United States on this issue, with the Secretary of State strongly supporting Ukraine, while the Pentagon believes Ukraine will not be able to retake Crimea by force. However, the mainstream view is to continue supporting Ukraine. Other NATO countries are also upgrading their weapons assistance to Ukraine, providing more advanced long-range weapons. Ukraine is not interested in negotiations and would rather fight with Russia. Against this backdrop, a forceful recapture of Crimea becomes the only viable option for Ukraine. Ukrainian forces continue to attack Russian military facilities in Crimea, and after the attack on Dzhankoy, they have frequently targeted Russian military sites in the region with drone strikes. Naturally, Russian forces will retaliate, and Ukrainian cities such as Odessa and Kharkiv have suffered missile attacks. These retaliatory actions will intensify the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, making the battle for Crimea inevitable. Although there is no large-scale conflict between Russia and Ukraine in Crimea yet, both sides have engaged in constant harassment. There are signs that a large-scale conflict is imminent, and Ukrainian forces are stepping up preparations. Ukraine stated last year that it planned to reclaim Crimea, thus reinforcing its deployment and resources. Ukrainian forces are holding their ground in Bakhmut, tying up Russian forces, while concentrating resources for counterattacks in other areas. Ukraine is forming 8 assault brigades, with a total combat strength of about 30,000 experienced veterans. These newly formed brigades may have already devised counterattack plans. The U.S.-supplied ground-launched small-diameter bombs will enable Ukrainian forces to easily strike deep into Russian territory, expanding their attack range. Ukrainian forces can learn from the tactics used in Kherson, cutting off Russian logistics and coordinating attacks on train stations to accelerate their offensive. NATO's support for Ukraine's tank alliance will further enhance Ukrainian forces' assault capabilities. Although NATO's increased assistance is intended to prevent a major Russian spring counteroffensive, the primary function of tanks is to break through defenses. As a result, Ukrainian forces may launch their counteroffensive once the tanks are in place. Specific details regarding the timing, direction, routes, and forces of the counteroffensive remain unclear. However, according to U.S. officials and other media sources, the counteroffensive may take place in May, after Ukraine's ice melt season, which is favorable for armored unit mobility. There are two possible counteroffensive routes. The first involves advancing south from Kherson across the Dnieper River and into Crimea. However, as Ukrainian amphibious assault capabilities are weak, how this issue will be addressed remains to be seen. The second counteroffensive plan involves advancing eastward from the north to the Russian border, then pushing southwest, directly cutting off the Russian land corridor. This route requires sweeping through Luhansk, penetrating deep into the Russian rear at Bakhmut, and then severing the land bridge connecting Crimea. This would cause logistical problems for Russian forces. Although this attack route is more circuitous, it could liberate the entire Luhansk region, half of Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea. However, the second route is relatively more challenging, and Ukrainian forces may still choose to start from Kherson. Mariupol could also be a good breakthrough point. Although the fighting in Mariupol has ceased, the closest battlefield is less than 100 kilometers away. Theoretically, once Ukrainian forces break through Russian lines and infiltrate Mariupol, they can separate Russian forces in eastern Ukraine from those in Crimea and southern Ukraine. The Crimean Bridge would struggle to support the needs of tens of thousands of Russian soldiers and the entire Crimean population. In terms of weapons and equipment, the NATO-supplied weapons already meet the established requirements. The strength of the newly formed Ukrainian units ranks well in Europe. In terms of air power, Ukrainian forces have some capabilities, having acquired American-made DAMs, HARM anti-radiation missiles, AIM-120 missiles, and Polish-supported MiG-29s. Considering the accuracy of the ammunition, there is little difference between Russia and Ukraine in terms of ground fire support. In summary, Ukraine has stated that once weapons and ammunition are in place, they will certainly liberate Crimea. The specific timing and methods remain uncertain, as the battlefield is constantly changing and only rough estimates can be made. If you have any differing opinions, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.